Welcome to Digital Story Corner, where every story stirs your soul. It's time for our moral story. Sit back, relax, and let's begin. Have you ever said something in anger that you could never take back? Not something small, not a careless comment that faded by morning. Something that landed like a stone thrown through glass, permanent, irreversible, changing the shape of everything on the other side. Most of us have. And most of us carry that moment long after everyone else has forgotten it. This is the story of Henry Callum, a man who spent 40 years learning that the words we speak in our worst moments are not who we are, but that the words we choose in our best moments are the only way to prove it. Henry Callum was 61 years old, recently retired, and by every visible measure, a successful man. He had spent 35 years as a high school history teacher in a small town called Birchfield, Ohio. He had taught over 2,000 students during those decades. He had won the County Teaching Award 4 times. He had coached the debate team to 3 state championships. His retirement party filled the school gymnasium, and the principal had said into a microphone in front of 300 people that Henry Callum was the kind of teacher students remembered for the rest of their lives. Henry had smiled and shaken hands and accepted every kind word with genuine gratitude. But sitting alone in his car afterward, in the quiet of the school parking lot, he thought about one student he had not remembered correctly for 40 years. One student whose face came back to him that night with a clarity that felt like a verdict. His name was Owen Marsh. Henry had taught Owen Marsh in 1984, when Henry was 26 years old and in only his second year of teaching. Owen was 16, quiet, and brilliant in a way that was easy to overlook. Not the kind of brilliant that raises its hand and volunteers answers, but the kind that fills the margins of notebooks with questions nobody else thought to ask. Owen was also, in that particular way of certain 16-year-olds, deeply uncool. He wore the wrong clothes. He ate lunch alone most days. He spoke carefully and sincerely in a school that rewarded quick wit and casual indifference, and that sincerity made him a target. Henry noticed Owen. He liked him. He recognized the quality of his mind in a way he didn't always articulate, but genuinely felt. And then, on a Friday afternoon in November 1984, Henry Callum made the worst mistake of his teaching career. It was the last class of the day. Henry was tired. The week had been long, and his patience was worn thin. Owen had turned in an essay on the causes of World War I that was, by any objective measure, extraordinary. Dense with original thinking, beautifully argued, unlike anything a 16-year-old had handed Henry before or since. But Owen had formatted it incorrectly. The assignment required a specific citation style that Owen had ignored entirely, lost in the substance of his argument. Henry should have pulled Owen aside privately. He knew that, even in the moment. But he was tired, and the class was restless, and something in him chose the wrong thing. He held up Owen's essay in front of the entire class and said, "This is exactly what happens when someone thinks they're too clever to follow instructions. Brilliant ideas mean nothing if you can't do the basic work." The class went quiet. Owen, sitting in the 3rd row, looked at his desk. He did not look up for the rest of the period. Henry knew immediately that he had done something that could not be undone simply by wishing it could. Owen Marsh did not return to Henry's class after Thanksgiving break. His family had moved, Henry was told, relocated to another state. Henry filed that information away with the particular efficiency of someone who does not want to examine something too closely, and moved on. But Owen's face stayed with him. Not every day, not even every year, but in the quiet moments, driving home after a long week, lying awake in the particular silence of 3 in the morning, Owen Marsh would appear in Henry's memory, sitting in that 3rd row seat, looking at his desk. Henry had told himself many versions of the story over the decades, that Owen was resilient, that one comment from a tired teacher couldn't derail a mind that sharp, that the boy had probably gone on to do remarkable things and had long since forgotten a minor humiliation from high school. He told himself these things because the alternative was harder to carry. 3 months after his retirement party, Henry was cleaning out boxes in his garage when he found a folder of old class photographs from his first years of teaching. He sat on an overturned crate in the afternoon light, turning pages slowly, recognizing faces he hadn't thought of in decades. And there was Owen, third row, slight build, looking at the camera with those careful, serious eyes. Henry sat with that photograph for a long time. That evening, on an impulse he didn't fully examine, he opened his laptop and typed Owen Marsh's name into a search engine. It took him less than 3 minutes to find him. Owen Marsh was 56 years old and lived in Portland, Oregon. He was a professor of modern European history at a university there. He had written 4 books, 2 of which had won academic prizes. His faculty page listed a research interest in the origins of the First World War. Henry stared at that last line for a long time. The origins of the First World War. The exact subject of the essay Henry had held up in front of the class in November 1984. He closed the laptop. He made himself a cup of tea he did not drink. He sat at his kitchen table in the dark for an hour. Then he opened the laptop again and began to write a letter. It took him 11 drafts over 3 weeks to write something he felt was honest without being self-serving. The hardest part was resisting the temptation to make the letter about his own guilt, to frame it in a way that asked Owen to comfort him, to absolve him, to say it was fine. It wasn't fine. Henry knew that. The letter needed to say so plainly. He wrote, "I've thought about that Friday afternoon many times over the past 40 years. I want to be clear that I am not writing to ask for your forgiveness, because I don't believe I have earned the right to ask for that. I am writing because I think you deserve to know that what I did that day was wrong, and that I have known it was wrong since the moment I did it. You handed me something extraordinary that day, a piece of thinking that most adults would have been proud of, and I used it to make a point at your expense, in front of your peers, at an age when that kind of thing lands differently than it does later in life. I should have celebrated what you gave me. Instead, I diminished it. I am sorry. Not the kind of sorry that asks anything of you in return, just sorry." He mailed the letter on a Tuesday morning and told himself not to expect a reply. 6 weeks passed. Henry had largely made his peace with silence when a reply arrived. Not a letter, but an email, forwarded through the university's general contact form. It was 3 paragraphs long. Owen wrote that he remembered the day clearly, which he had expected Henry might wonder about. He wrote that it had hurt, in the specific way that certain moments hurt when you were 16 and already uncertain of your place in the world. He wrote that he had thought about it more than he probably should have over the years. But then he wrote something Henry had not expected. He wrote, "What I remember more than the embarrassment, though, is that you were the only teacher in that school who ever held up any of my work at all. Even the way you did it, badly, and at my expense, told me that you had actually read what I wrote, that you thought it was worth responding to, even if your response was wrong. I have spent a lot of years in classrooms since then, on both sides of the desk, and I know now that being truly seen by a teacher, even imperfectly, even painfully, is rarer than it should be. I don't say this to let you off the hook. I say it because it's true, and because I think you should know that the full story is more complicated than the worst moment in it." Henry read that email 4 times. Then he put his face in his hands and sat quietly for a long time, with the particular weight of being understood by someone you wronged. They exchanged emails over the following months, carefully at first, then with increasing ease, the way 2 people correspond when they have discovered an unexpected common ground. Owen was teaching a graduate seminar on wartime propaganda. Henry had spent 35 years teaching the same period to teenagers. They had more to say to each other than either of them anticipated. In the spring, Owen was invited to give a lecture at a university 2 hours from Birchfield. He mentioned it in an email without pressure or expectation. Henry drove the 2 hours. He sat in the back row of a lecture hall and watched Owen Marsh, gray-haired now, unhurried, speaking with the same careful sincerity Henry had recognized in a 16-year-old boy in the 3rd row, hold a room of 200 people completely still for 90 minutes. He was, as Henry had always known he would be, extraordinary. Afterward, in the hallway outside the lecture hall, they shook hands for the first time in 40 years. Owen was taller than Henry remembered. They were both older than either of them felt. "Thank you for the letter," Owen said. "Thank you for the reply," Henry said. They stood there for a moment in the comfortable quiet of two people who have said the most important things already, in writing, where the words could be chosen carefully and kept. Henry Callum drove home that evening through the flat Ohio countryside, the last light fading behind the tree line, thinking about the 40 years between a Friday afternoon in November and a handshake in a university hallway. He thought about the words he had said that had cost something, and the words he had finally written that had cost something different. Pride, the comfort of forgetting, the easier story he had told himself for decades. He thought about what Owen had written. The full story is more complicated than the worst moment in it. That was true of Owen's story. Henry believed now that it was true of most stories, that the worst moment is never the whole truth of a person, but that the worst moment still matters, still leaves a mark, still requires something of us beyond simply moving on. What it requires is the harder thing, the thing most people never do, to go back, to say plainly what was wrong, to ask nothing in return, and to trust that the full story, told honestly, is always larger than its worst chapter. If this story moved you, subscribe to Digital Story Corner and hit the bell. A brand new story drops every single day.